Have you ever really thought about what goes on behind the scenes when a company decides your salary? It can feel kind of random, but it's actually driven by this incredibly powerful economic idea that scales up from a tiny business all the way to the entire global economy. Okay, let's get right into it.
So where does that number on your paycheck actually come from? I mean, is it just your experience, your negotiation skills, what the company can afford? Well, yeah, all those things matter. But underneath it all, there's a fundamental logic, a simple rule that applies to every single business out there.
To get to that rule, we're going to forget about big, complex corporations for a minute. Instead, we're going to build a business from scratch, a super simple pizza shop. And believe it or not, this little shop holds the key to understanding, well, everything. All right, so our pizza shop has just two things to worry about. First, we've got our fixed resource, one amazing, top-of-the-line pizza oven. That part doesn't change. And second, we have our variable resource, the cooks we hire to actually make the pizzas. The big question for us as the owner is, how many cooks should we actually hire?
Let's look at the numbers. With one cook, we're cranking out 100 pizzas an hour. Awesome. So we hire a second cook and our total output jumps to 180. Now wait a second. That second cook only added 80 pizzas, not another 100. Then we hire a third, we get to 210, but they only added 30 more. By the time we get to that fifth cook, they're only adding 2 extra pizzas an hour. So you see, the really important number here isn't the total, it's what each new worker brings to the table.
And this idea, it has a name. It's called marginal product. It's just a fancy way of saying, what's the extra stuff you get from adding one more of something? In our case, one more cook. So the second cook's marginal product was 80 pizzas. The third's was 30. This idea, right here, is the absolute bedrock of this whole thing.
Now, what we just saw happen in our little pizza shop, that's not just some random quirk. Nope, it's actually a fundamental law of economics in action.
And you can see it so clearly right here on this chart. That first cook is an all-star, a hero. The second one is still great. The third, they're helping. But by the fifth cook, they're barely moving the needle. And why is that? Well, think about it. They all have to share that one trusty oven. They start getting in each other's way, waiting for space. It just gets crowded.
And this phenomenon has a name, the law of diminishing returns. It's a cornerstone of all economics. It just means that when you have a fixed resource, like our oven, and you keep adding a variable one, like cooks, each new cook is eventually going to be less productive than the last. It's just a law of nature almost.
So now we get to the heart of it all. As the owner of this pizza shop, you face a very simple decision for every single person you think about hiring. On one hand, you have the value of the extra pizzas they're going to make, and on the other, you've got the wage you have to pay them. It's a balancing act. And here it is, the golden rule. A smart business owner is going to keep hiring people as long as the value they add is more than what they cost. You stop at the exact point where hiring one more person would cost you more in salary than they'd make you in pizza sales. That's the stopping point, period. Okay, in the language of economics, it looks like this. Now, don't let the letters scare you. It's actually really simple. It just says that in a competitive market, a worker's real wage, that's their wage after you account for prices, is set by their marginal product of labor, their MPL. Your pay is directly tied to the value you produce at the margin.
Now here's where it gets really, really cool. This logic, it's not just about hiring people, it applies to basically every business decision, including whether to invest in more stuff.
Yep, the exact same principle determines the return you'd get on your capital. So let's say we're thinking about buying a second pizza oven. How do we decide if that's a good move? Well, we use the exact same marginal thinking.
And we call this the marginal product of capital, or MPK. Sound familiar? It's the extra output you get from adding one more machine, or one more building, or in our case, one more pizza oven. It's the same idea we just used for our cooks, but for stuff instead of people.
So the decision is a perfect mirror image of the hiring decision. On one side, you've got the value of all the extra pizzas the new oven will help you make, and on the other side, you've got the cost of buying or renting that oven. You make the investment as long as the return is bigger than the cost. Simple as that.
Okay, so let's zoom out, way out. We've seen how one little pizza shop makes its decisions. But what happens when you have millions of businesses, from pizza shops to tech giants, all making these same calculations every single day? Well, it explains something huge.
All those tiny individual decisions, they all add up.
They literally determine how the entire economic output of a country, the whole economic pie, gets sliced and served. Every decision to hire, every decision to invest, when repeated millions of times, shapes the entire national economy.
And at the end of the day, all the income in a country is divided into two giant buckets. There's the share that goes to labor, that's all of us getting wages and salaries, and then there's the share that goes to capital, that's profits, rent, and interest. And the marginal productivity of each one is what decides how big its slice of the pie is.
Now, believe it or not, it all comes together in this one kind of beautiful equation. It says that the total output of an entire economy is simply the sum of what all the workers are paid, which is based on their marginal product, plus the sum of what all the capital earns, which is based on its marginal product. It's almost like a grand theory of everything for how income works.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? What do you absolutely need to remember? Well, first, your wage isn't just some random number. It's fundamentally linked to your marginal productivity. Second, the exact same rule applies to investments in things like machines and buildings. And finally, and this is the amazing part, this one simple rule connects your personal paycheck all the way up to the entire national economy.
And that brings us to one last really interesting question to chew on. What happens when some new technology comes along and makes our capital, our trusty pizza oven, suddenly twice as good? How does that change the whole equation for everyone's wages and for profits? Now that's some food for thought.
All right, let's talk about just one number. You know, it's one of those economic stats that you probably hear on the news, but you don't really think about it much. But as we're about to see, this one little number, it tells a fascinating and honestly pretty surprising story about who's really working in a country and who isn't. So let me just ask you this straight up. In a country like the US, think about everyone who's of working age, everybody who is employed to have a job. What percentage of them do you think are actually in the labor force? Either working or actively looking for a job. Go on, just take a guess in your head. Okay, you got a number in mind? So let's dig in. Now, if you guessed something pretty high, say 80%, maybe even 90%, you are not alone. That's what most of us assume, right? But the real number is, well, it's way different. And why it's so different is what's really, really revealing. Okay, but before I just drop the answer on you, we've got to make sure we're all on the same page. We need to be crystal clear about what we're even measuring here. It's an official term that economists use all the time, the labor force participation rate. And here's the key thing to get, right? The labor force, it isn't just people who have a job. It also includes anyone who's officially unemployed but is, actively sending out resumes, going on interviews, trying to find work. Think of it like the total pool of available workers, the ones already in the game and the ones on the bench ready to play. And how they calculate it is actually super straightforward. It's just two steps. First, you count up everyone who's employed. Then, you add everyone who's unemployed but looking. You get that one big number, and then you just divide it by the entire working age population. That's it. Simple as that. Okay, so now we know exactly what we're talking about. We've got the definition, we've got the formula. You're ready for the actual number, the big reveal? Let's look at the United States. 62.5%. That's a number. In the US, it's been floating right around there for a while now. Just let that sink in for a second. That means for every 10 people who could be working, almost 4 of them are not only jobless, they're not even looking for a job. That is a massive gap compared to that 80 or 90% most of us guessed, right? So yeah, the obvious question is, where is everybody else? If they aren't working and they're not looking for work, what's going on with that other, 37.5% of the population? And this is where it all starts to make sense, right? This is why the number is never going to be 100%. I mean, you've got full-time students, you've got a whole lot of retirees, you have stay-at-home parents or people caring for family members. And of course, some people just choose not to work for their own reasons. And then there's this really important group, what economists call discouraged workers. These are folks who were looking, but they just couldn't find anything, so they've stopped. They've dropped out of the search, so they're no longer officially counted as unemployed. Okay, so that's the US picture, but now let's zoom out and take a trip around the globe, because this is where the story gets really interesting. You'll see that the countries with the highest rates, they're probably not the ones you're thinking of. So just look at this table. The rankings are kind of wild, right? You've got Uganda way up top at 81%. That's so much higher than developed countries like France or Israel, and especially the US. And that tells you something really important right away. A high participation rate doesn't necessarily mean a booming modern economy. In fact, it often means the opposite.
It can point to a situation where a lot more people simply have to work, maybe in farming or small informal jobs, because there's no social safety net. They work just to survive. And that leads us to a really, really critical point here. These official statistics are great. They're useful. They have some pretty big blind spots. They just don't tell the whole story of what's happening on the ground. Because the truth is, in just about every country, there's a whole other economy humming along in the shadows, completely off the official books and totally invisible to the statisticians. So you really have two economies running side by side. You've got the official one, right? The one that gets reported, taxed, and tracked. And then you have the informal economy. Some people call it the black market. This is all the work that's done for cash, under the table. And none of it, absolutely none of it, gets counted in a number like the labor force participation rate. So when we look at these numbers, we have to remember two big things. First, there's that massive uncounted informal economy we just talked about. And second, well, the data itself isn't always perfect. The ability to accurately track and report this stuff varies a lot from country to country. So for some places, you kind of have to take these official figures with a grain of salt. Okay, so after all that, you might be asking, why does this one number matter so much? Well, because even with its flaws, it points to something huge. A country's hidden economic potential. And this is really the key takeaway from all of this. That huge gap between the current rate and 100%, it's not just a statistic. It's like a giant reservoir of untapped human potential. Think about it. If a country can figure out how to bring even a small fraction of those people into the official workforce, maybe with better childcare or job training or more flexible work, it could just massively boost its entire economy. Every single percentage point we're talking about represents millions of people, millions of brains and skills ready to contribute. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. Just imagine, what if a country like the US could boost its participation rate by just 10%, from say 62 to 72%? Can you even imagine the explosion of talent, productivity, and economic growth that would unlock? So you see, this one little number, it doesn't just tell us who's working today. It shows us how much incredible human potential is still just waiting on the sidelines.